Eliza Wren set her bag down on the passenger seat, her fingers still trembling from fastening the seatbelt. She stared at the sealed envelope in her hand, hospital logo embossed faintly on its flap. It was thin, light, and yet held a weight that pressed against her chest like a boulder. On the clinic wall, a poster with bold letters read, "Live with hope, fight with courage." Now it just felt like a cruel joke. At 45, Eliza had once been a rising photographer, her landscapes displayed in the riverside galleries of Astoria. But after marrying Theo Wren, an ambitious architect, she slowly receded into the background. Long photo expeditions became charity events. Forest trails gave way to cocktail hours and client dinners. She didn't regret it. Not really. She loved Theo. And she had loved the life they'd built, or at least she thought she had. Dr. Mara, her longtime friend since high school, had spoken clearly, her voice still echoing in Eliza's head. Stage 2. The good news is we caught it early. You'll need surgery, radiation, and close monitoring. Eliza, you have a strong chance, but we have to start now. She nodded like a robot in the clinic room, but it wasn't until she was alone in her car that the tears came. Quiet and without sound. They fell onto the steering wheel, mixing with the amber light of the setting sun, spilling down the narrow streets along the bay. She wiped her face with the back of her hand and inhaled slowly. She couldn't let tears ruin tonight. She had planned this evening for a week, their 17-year anniversary of moving into the little house on Franklin Bay, where they'd built a life from scratch. Just dinner, like we used to. Just the two of us, she'd texted Theo on Monday. He replied with a thumbs-up emoji. But Eliza had hoped, last year, they'd still laughed in the kitchen. He'd wrapped his arms around her when she burned the sauce. Well, at least it's a memory, he joked. She believed then that things were still okay. She wanted to believe it again. That no matter what came, if Theo was with her, she'd be fine. 8:12 p.m. Headlights swept across the window. A car door slammed. Theo was home. He paused at the door. The image of the afternoon still lingered in his mind. Daphne walking into the conference room late, her white blouse soaked from an unexpected rainstorm, clinging to her skin. She laughed, tossed her bag on the table, and crossed her legs across from him like it was her private stage. "You keep looking at me like that, and I'm going to think you're about to eat me alive," she teased, voice low and deliberate. And in that moment, Theo just wanted to forget the silent dinners, the long evenings sitting beside Eliza where both ran out of things to say. Daphne made him feel young. Desired. Like he still had the right to start over. Eliza had become part of the furniture in his life. Warm, steady, and quiet. He drew a long breath, then opened the door. Eliza reapplied her lipstick, smoothed the edge of the tablecloth, and straightened as he walked in. He wore a charcoal gray shirt, tie loosened, jacket draped over his shoulder. He smiled, not warmly, not tiredly, just lightly. "Salmon?" he asked, removing his watch without looking at her. "Eliza," he said, settling into the chair across from her, his tone shifting. "I think we need to talk." Her hand froze on the wineglass. He looked at her, for the first time in months, without avoidance, without excuse. But there was no tenderness in his gaze, just resolve. As if he'd rehearsed it in the mirror. "I don't think we're us anymore." Eliza didn't speak, not because she didn't understand, but because she'd sensed this coming, just not this cruelly timed, when she was about to tell him she had cancer. "I've tried, Eliza, but every day I come home, it feels like I'm living in a memory, not a life. I'm not myself anymore." She set her glass down, hand no longer steady. "Is there someone else?" she asked, voice barely above a whisper. Theo's response came quickly, a little too quickly. "I'm not leaving you for someone. There's no one else. I don't love you the same way anymore, and I think you don't either." "What do you mean?" she asked, voice low and even. He stared into his wine, swirling the ice with his finger. "I'm tired, Eliza. Tired of pretending everything's fine. tired of walking into this house and feeling emptier than ever." "Empty?" Her brows furrowed. "Because we don't have children?" He didn't respond right away, but his eyes did. "Yes, that's part of it." Eliza held her breath. "We tried," she said quietly. "You know that." "I know," he said. "You used to say all you needed was me." "I believed that, back then," Theo answered, eyes averted. "But I'm not sure anymore. I don't want to keep waiting for something that may never come. I don't want to live in a house where the future is always a question mark." She gripped the edge of the table. "And you think leaving is the answer?" Theo stood, retrieving his coat. "Eliza, you're stronger than me. You can live on memories and photographs and silence. I can't. I need something tangible. A child. A complete family. A new beginning." Eliza let out a short, bitter laugh. "A new beginning? With who?" "No one," he said, too fast again. "I just need to leave before we both turn cruel." He walked away from the table and down the hall, leaving behind the flickering candles, the cold salmon, and the woman who had planned everything, to tell him that a tumor had taken root inside her. Next day, Eliza came to the hospital alone. The medical consultation room had a sterile stillness that chilled the skin. On the wall were charts, diagrams of breast anatomy, stages of abnormal cell growth, the steps of chemotherapy. Eliza couldn't look at any of them for more than a few seconds. Dr. Mara placed a folder gently on the table, her expression softening when she saw how tightly Eliza was wringing her hands. "We have 3 options," she said, voice calm and steady, the kind of voice only a true friend could use when you're about to enter deep water. "Eliza, the tumor is located in the upper left quadrant. It's 2.3 centimeters. No lymph node involvement. That's our silver lining. First step is a lumpectomy, followed by radiation, and if needed, adjuvant chemo." Eliza nodded, mechanical. Words like adjuvant, recurrence, invasive bounced around her skull like unwanted knocks at the door. "You'll need someone to go through this with you," Mara said, leaning in. "Not just physically, mentally. No matter how strong you are, no one goes through this alone." Eliza gave a faint smile. "I used to think I could." She didn't say the part where the one person who should have been there, the first to know, had walked away before she even had the chance to say the word cancer. Mara didn't ask about Theo. She simply noted something down and slid a paper calendar across the table. Next Tuesday, biopsy and anesthesia consult. That afternoon, Eliza turned down the cobbled street leading to the bay. She often walked there, especially when she needed to escape the noise of the city. But today the path felt endless, and each step pushed her further from the life she once knew. The sea breeze tugged at her loose bun. She paused outside a small tea house by the water, the same one where she used to sit for hours editing photos for travel features. That was another life. A life where her passion was her center, not just some dim blur behind someone else's spotlight. "Sweetheart," she startled, that voice low, warm, unmistakable. "Horace Wren." Her father-in-law. Horace Wren wasn't the type to be warm in the conventional sense. He was tall, silver-haired early in life, with eyes so sharp they looked like they could read through sealed letters. A famed antique collector in the Pacific Northwest, he owned a trove of maritime maps, 18th-century pocket watches, and rare royal jewelry sourced from private auctions across Europe. He wasn't loud, but when Horace entered a room, people instinctively fell quiet. He didn't need boardroom authority or brash declarations. His presence was power in stillness. When Eliza first joined the family, he was the one who invited her into his study to see a few Japanese woodblock prints. Instead of showing off, he poured tea, handed her a blank notebook, and said, "You don't need to become someone else here. Just be yourself, and document it in whatever language you have." She still had that notebook. Some Saturdays she would bring apple pie to his bookshop, the Compass Rose, and they'd sit for hours discussing the structure of light in old film photography or the silence in Turner's seascapes. No one in the Wren family understood their bond. But that didn't matter. In a family of gala dinners and curated networks, Horace and Eliza were two still objects placed in the wrong corner, but somehow essential to the composition. He was still wearing the same worn leather jacket, a gray wool scarf wrapped loosely around his neck. In the amber light, his face looked slightly more hollow than the last time they met, but his eyes were just as sharp, as if he could see the things left unsaid. "Just out for a walk," Eliza replied, a little stiff. Her smile felt forced, even to herself. Horace didn't rush. He studied her for a long moment before stepping closer, voice slow and even. "You've lost weight," he said. "Not the kind that comes from dieting, the kind that happens when your body is fighting something." Eliza gripped the strap of her bag tighter. "I noticed something off during Theo's birthday," he continued. "You were there, but it felt like you were somewhere far away. I saw that look once before, in his mother before she fell ill." Eliza looked down. Her eyes stung. The walls she'd built over the past few weeks, with logic, with silence, began to crack. "I found out a few weeks ago," she whispered. "Breast cancer, stage 2. Horace nodded, not shocked, not rattled, just as though he was confirming a suspicion his eyes had already spoken. "Are you getting treatment?" he asked gently. "Yes, Mara's my primary. Biopsies next week." Horace placed a hand on her shoulder, warm, steady, like the trunk of an old tree in the middle of a storm. He was about to say something when Eliza exhaled, her voice dipping lower. "You don't have to worry, Dad. I'll manage, even without Theo." The words fell quietly, but to Horace they shattered like glass. He stiffened. "What did you say?" he asked, his brows furrowed as if checking whether he'd heard right. Eliza turned toward the water, the sunlight dancing faintly across its surface. "He asked for a divorce," she said. It was the first time she said it aloud to anyone in the family. "Right before I could tell him, before I could even say the word cancer, he told me he needed freedom." Horace froze, his hand dropping from her shoulder like a branch breaking under its own weight. "He said that? Now? Of all times?" Eliza nodded. Her shoulders curled slightly inward, not from the wind, but from standing exposed in front of someone who had always seen her as a daughter. Boris took a step back, as if the air had grown too tight. He braced himself on the old wooden railing of the tea house, his gaze locked on the glittering water. "I had no idea," he said slowly, voice hoarse. "He told me everything was fine, said you were just busy with photography again, and that's why we hadn't talked." "I haven't picked up a camera in years," Eliza said softly. "I stepped back to protect our family. But it turns out that family didn't keep me." Horace looked up at her, something raw in his eyes, part sorrow, part guilt, and part awakening from a dream he hadn't realized he was in. "You shouldn't have to face all of this alone," he said, voice deeper now, firmer. "And if he doesn't have the courage to stand beside you, then at the very least, I won't let you fight this in silence." Eliza didn't say anything, but for the first time in weeks, her silence didn't feel like solitude. Eliza returned home and stepped into her small kitchen, afternoon sunlight spilling across the faded ceramic tiles. She removed her scarf, hung it on the wooden hook by the door, then paused, her hand resting absent-mindedly on an old photo frame sitting on the shelf. In the picture, two girls stood side by side under a blazing red maple tree. Eliza was 19. The other was Naomi, her younger cousin, just 16 back then, skinny and stubborn, often skipping class to sketch doodles in the margins of her textbooks. Years later, Naomi became an art teacher at a public high school a few hours from Astoria. They still kept in touch, but not often. Life had a way of pulling people into separate currents. Eliza picked up her phone, hesitated for a moment, then dialed. Naomi picked up after 2 rings, no hesitation. "Eliza?" Her voice rang out, surprised. "I was just thinking about you. Weird." Eliza smiled faintly, offering no explanation. She sank into the wooden chair by the kitchen table and took a long breath. I need to tell you something. And I need you." 3 days later, Naomi was standing in Eliza's doorway. Light luggage, a coat draped across her shoulders, her hair tied high, and her brown eyes still carrying the same spark of youth they once shared. She didn't ask questions. She just hugged Eliza tightly, then rolled up her sleeves, reorganized the kitchen, remade the guest bed, and replaced every hallway light bulb with soft golden ones. "No reason to leave shadows in a house like this," Naomi said while sorting medications in the cabinet. That afternoon, they went to the hospital together for the biopsy appointment. Eliza sat quietly in the waiting room, her hospital gown thin and cold, though not as cold as the dread sitting in her chest. Naomi sat beside her, gripping her hand, reading out the names of the artworks on the wall as if she were turning the clinic into an art gallery. When the nurse called Eliza's name, Naomi stood up with her. "Family?" the nurse asked. "Sister," Naomi replied without pause. Eliza turned to her, surprised. Naomi simply smiled. "You were the only one who stood by me when I dropped out of college to pursue art. I think it's time I did something for you." That sentence lingered in Eliza's mind later that evening as the two of them sat at the kitchen table, bathed in soft yellow light, 2 steaming mugs of peppermint tea between them. Outside the window, the sea was quiet, fishing boats already docked for the night. Naomi leaned back in her chair, legs tucked beneath her like she used to do in high school. "Did you talk to Dr. Mara about the next steps?" she asked, looking straight at Eliza, not at any paperwork. Eliza nodded slowly. "If the biopsy result confirms what we expect, I'll have surgery to remove the tumor. Then 6 weeks of weekly radiation. Maybe chemo if there's micrometastasis." "Are you scared?" Naomi asked, barely more than a whisper. Eliza paused. She set her cup down. "Yes," she said, her voice steady but deep. "Not of the pain. I'm scared of doing all of it alone." Naomi started to speak, but Eliza continued. "I used to think I'd have a big family, Theo, maybe kids. But in the end, I have neither." Naomi looked at her, eyes softening. "You two tried, didn't you?" Eliza nodded, a wistful smile tugging at her lips. "For the first 3 years we tried everything, pills, tracking, timing, counting days, but my body never cooperated. Every month was a cycle of hope, then disappointment, and then one day, we just stopped mentioning it. We let it fade like a scratch on the palm. Small, but never healing." Naomi was silent. Outside, the wind slipped through the window seam, carrying the soft clinks of boats knocking gently against their moorings, like the quiet breath of a memory without a name. "Did you think a child would have kept him?" Naomi asked. Eliza shook her head. "No, I just thought, if we had a child, there'd be something that belonged to me, even if everything else fell apart." "But I think you still do," Naomi said, resting her hand on Eliza's. "You have yourself, and this time, you're not losing who you are for anyone else." Eliza looked at her cousin, her little sister in all but name, and saw in those brown eyes the same fierce loyalty, the same stubborn courage that had never once stepped back. And in that moment, Eliza didn't feel like a woman abandoned or a cancer patient about to face knives and chemicals. She just felt like a sister. Loved. It was Thursday morning. Eliza sat on the 3rd floor of the St. Ives Oncology Center in a quiet space called the Calm Room, a small lounge with floor-to-ceiling glass looking out over a man-made lotus pond. It was a place for patients to wait between treatments. Her headscarf, printed with olive branches, covered thinning hair, slowly falling out from radiation. Naomi sat beside her, reading a slim paperback. She didn't talk much. She didn't need to. The way she occasionally tilted her head to glance at Eliza, refilled her water bottle, or silently unwrapped a peppermint from her pocket, it was enough. Enough to remind Eliza she wasn't invisible in this cold world of machines and needles. Eliza had just completed her 8th round of radiation. Every time she walked past the heavy lead doors, she felt like she left something behind. A bit of strength, a little hope, a weariness that no word could describe. She was resting, eyes closed, breathing steady, when she heard a familiar low voice from the doorway. "Eliza?" She opened her eyes. Horace stood there, holding a gray fedora in his hands. There was a flicker of unease on his face, the quiet discomfort of a man stepping into a place he never wished to see his daughter-in-law in. "Dad?" Eliza said, surprised, straightening up at once. Naomi stood, nodded politely. Horace nodded back, then took the chair across from Eliza. "I'm not intruding, am I?" Eliza shook her head. "No, I just finished my session." He nodded again, twisting the brim of his hat between his fingers. A quiet pause settled between them before Horace finally spoke, eyes still fixed on the pond. "I received an invitation yesterday." Eliza looked up. "An invitation?" He reached into his coat pocket and laid a card on the table, cream-colored, silver-edged, embossed with elegant text. "You are cordially invited to the engagement celebration of Daphne Lake and Theodore Wren Lakeview Estate next Saturday, 4 p.m. Time seemed to still. Eliza stared at the card for a long while. Her fingers brushed lightly over the name she still carried. Wren, a name that had once been a part of her. Now it felt like a clean, cold slice. "I didn't know," she whispered. "He never told me." Horace exhaled slowly. "I thought you should hear it from me. I'm not sure I'll attend. It's all too fast." Eliza nodded, closed her eyes for a few seconds. Not because she was breaking, but because she was recalibrating, remeasuring her trust in what used to be called love. "Thank you for telling me the truth," she said, opening her eyes to meet his. Horace looked at Eliza. This woman who had once quietly held his son together, who cooked dinner on late work nights, who set down her camera to preserve a home. And now she sat before him, hair gone, body worn thin. But in her eyes, something was stirring. Not weakness, rebirth. That night, Eliza couldn't sleep. The fatigue from radiation still ached in her bones, but it was the exhaustion in her mind that kept her awake. The engagement invitation still lay on the table, beside a bottle of ginger water and her anti-nausea pills. She didn't open it again. She just looked at it, silver-edged, cold, and utterly devoid of anything that belonged to her. Around 2 a.m., Eliza turned on her phone. She rarely used social media, but tonight she typed Daphne Lake. The account was public, the kind of brazen confidence Eliza had expected. Images filled the screen. A young woman with low-tied blonde hair, vintage-inspired outfits that clung in all the right places, the kind of style that said natural in the most curated way possible. The most recent photo was of Daphne's hand resting atop a gold-embossed notebook. The engagement ring sparkled, front and center. Eliza scrolled, then paused. That ring, it looked familiar. An old design, twisted band, deep blue sapphire in the center, flanked by 2 small diamonds. Her heart stuttered, but she kept scrolling. She wasn't ready to face that possibility. Not yet. She went deeper, to older photos. A group shot from last year's Christmas party, Daphne beside Theo. They weren't touching, but the eyes said enough. Eliza zoomed in, the tilt of Daphne's head, that off-center smile, the way Theo's hand hovered behind her back, far enough to escape attention, close enough to suggest something more. She scrolled further. A saved story in a highlight called Team Vibes, a lakeside team retreat. In a wooden cabin setting, Theo and Daphne sat side by side, heads leaned close, wine glasses in hand. The person filming tagged them both. The date posted, 1 month before Theo asked for the divorce. Eliza set the phone down. Her hand remained clenched. It wasn't the engagement that hurt the most. It was the realization that she had once laid beside someone every night and never noticed when his eyes had long since turned toward someone else. Naomi was still asleep in the guest room. Eliza didn't want to wake her, so she sat alone in the kitchen and opened her old laptop, the one she used to edit magazine photo spreads years ago. A folder appeared, unsorted, fall 2016. Inside were hundreds of raw, unpublished photographs. Sunsets, hands intertwined underwater, rain-slick streets reflecting golden light. Eliza stared at them and began to cry. Not out of anger, but because it had been so long since she'd seen herself through the lens. She wiped her tears, then clicked on the first image. The next afternoon, while Naomi was sorting medication back into the cabinet, Eliza stepped out of her bedroom with something unfamiliar in her demeanor. Not the limpness that came after radiation, not the fragility of someone who had just wept, but the stillness of someone who knew something others didn't. "Eliza?" Naomi looked up. "Are you busy this afternoon?" Eliza asked, voice low but steady. "I need to see Judith Abernathy." Naomi raised an eyebrow. "The no-nonsense lawyer from way back?" "The one who once tore me apart during my senior presentation," Eliza said with a faint smile. "But also the first to offer me an internship, back when Theo was still assisting at some tiny design firm." Naomi nodded. She didn't ask why. When Eliza grabbed her coat, Naomi quietly packed a small notebook and a pocket recorder. The habit of an art teacher who believed in details. Judith Abernathy's law office was on the 3rd floor of a red brick building across from City Park. Her name was etched in black serif letters on frosted glass. When Eliza knocked, Judith herself answered. Same cold, piercing eyes, same low ponytail of silver hair. The same black raven brooch pinned to her lapel, the unofficial symbol of women who do not flinch. "Eliza Wren," Judith said, tone flat. "I assumed you'd forgotten who you used to be." "Maybe now I remember," Eliza replied, walking past her into the office. An hour later, the desk was covered with documents detailing the Wren estate, real estate holdings, shares, trust funds, and a catalog of rare antique items from Horace's private collection. "What do you want from me?" Judith asked, arms crossed, unblinking. "No lawsuits," Eliza said. "No compensation demands. I want the truth and, if possible, a well-placed message. No courtrooms required." Judith let out a dry laugh. "I'm starting to like you again." Eliza unlocked her phone and handed it to Judith. Screenshots from Daphne's public social media, the photo at the lakeside retreat, the close-up of the heirloom engagement ring. The very ring Horace once meant to give Eliza for their 10th anniversary. "That ring is proof," Eliza said. "It's for the person chosen to inherit the family legacy. And now it sits on the finger of someone who was sleeping with my husband while I was still legally his wife." Judith leaned back in her chair. "Then we need Horace's attorney," she said. "The only one with legal authority to confirm the morality clause in the estate distribution. And if he agrees to share a copy, then we have a weapon." The next morning, Eliza and Naomi walked into the Compass Rose, the old bookshop. Horace sat behind the counter, flipping through a leather-bound volume. He looked up, surprised. But when he saw Eliza's expression, he didn't ask why they were there. "Do you have a legal copy of the will?" Eliza asked directly. Horace studied her for a moment, then nodded slowly. "I thought about giving it to you. But then I wondered, if you didn't need it, why make you hurt more?" "I'm not using it for revenge," Eliza said. "But I need it to protect what's mine, because if I don't, someone else will rewrite the story however they want." Horace stayed quiet for a long moment. Then he disappeared into the back room. When he returned, he laid a thick golden envelope on the counter, sealed, marked with the family lawyer's insignia. "The truest testimony," he said, "is the one prepared long before anyone had a chance to do wrong." That night, Eliza sat alone in her small house. She placed the envelope beside her old camera, then powered the camera on, wiped the lens, inserted a memory card. A new message lit up her phone. "Confirmed. The engagement party is still set for Lakeview Estate, this Saturday. Full guest list includes all architecture firm partners." Eliza typed back, "Thank you." The message had come from an anonymous contact, but she knew it was someone who had once shared dinner at her family table. She picked up the camera. The red light blinked to life inside the viewfinder. For the first time in years, Eliza felt like her lens was aimed at something that truly mattered. Justice. And justice, she knew, didn't have to shout. It only had to arrive at the right time. Eliza stood in front of the mirror, slipping into a pure white dress, adorned with soft, glinting stones. It hugged her thinner frame with elegance, making her quiet gray eyes appear even sharper. "Are you sure about this?" Naomi stood behind her, voice low. "I'm not going to cause a scene," Eliza said, fastening the buttons. "I just want to show up, just once, as someone who lived that story, not a shadow erased from it." Naomi exhaled and stepped forward to adjust her sleeve. "Then let me capture that moment, whether you say something or not." Eliza met her eyes through the mirror, offering a faint smile. "I used to be the one telling the story. Now it's time someone tells mine." Lakeview Estate. A windless, cloudless Saturday afternoon. Nothing foretold what was coming, but it would go down as one of the most unforgettable storms in the Wren family's history. In the manicured garden, dozens of guests were seated at tables covered in white silk. Bottles of Italian wine had been uncorked, champagne glasses were poised, and cameras began capturing the opening moments of the celebration. Daphne Lake, radiant in an ivory strapless gown, her curls styled like a 1960s movie star, smiled brilliantly. Her eyes gleamed with the sheen of conquest. On her finger, a sapphire ring sparkled like it had something to prove. "I've won." Beside her stood Theodore Wren. Though anxiety still churned in him from that morning's board meeting, Theo wore perfection like a tailored suit. He had spent the last month redoing his teeth, resurfacing his skin with laser treatments, buying younger cut suits, learning how to use Instagram, even hiring a personal trainer, all to avoid looking mismatched next to Daphne. Daphne made him feel young again, or at least she made others think so. She called him Theo, darling, in a voice smooth as whipped cream, kissed him even when people were watching, laughed brightly at stories Eliza had heard 100 times but never once smiled at. He had abandoned years of quiet evenings, wine by the sea breeze, Eliza editing photos in silence. Now, he lived under spotlights and praise, Daphne's friends calling him the perfect match, her dream man. He left a woman because she no longer made him feel young, and he thought it was the right decision. Until the iron gate at the front opened, and 3 figures stepped in. An older man in a charcoal suit, silver hair groomed to perfection, eyes sharp enough to carve stone. A silver-haired woman with a gaze like a honed blade. And between them, a woman in a muted ivory silk dress, posture straight, chin lifted, Eliza Wren. A strange hush fell over the crowd. One by one, people turned. This was not a casual entrance. Theo saw them first. He stepped forward immediately, lips tight. "Dad, why are you bringing Eliza and Ms. Abernathy here?" Judith Abernathy opened her handbag and removed a sealed envelope, along with a folder stamped with official seals. Horace Wren stepped up, his voice deep, clear, and resonant like a bronze bell. "Son, I'm sorry to do this in front of everyone, but it must be done." Daphne moved closer, alarmed. "What's going on?" Eliza didn't look at Theo. She didn't look at Daphne either. Her eyes landed precisely where they needed to, on Daphne's left hand, where the sapphire ring caught the afternoon light. "That ring," she said, not loudly but sharp enough to cut, "has been in the Wren family since 1884. A 3.1-carat untreated cashmere sapphire, flanked by 2 Asher-cut diamonds from the late 19th century." No one spoke. Eliza met Daphne's eyes and continued. "It was valued at $4.2 million in a private auction in 2017. It has never been publicly listed, and it was never intended for anyone except the person officially chosen by this family." Judith pulled documents from her folder. Certificates of origin, appraisals, and an original photograph dated 1958 when the ring was restored by a master jeweler in Geneva. Horace nodded and stepped toward Theo. "That ring was not meant for you," he said, "unless the recipient was someone this family recognized. And you know very well, your mother wanted it for Eliza. No one else." Daphne turned pale. She instinctively tried to pull her hand back, but Horace gently took her wrist, firm, not forceful. "I'm sorry," he said softly, and removed the ring in one smooth, practiced motion. The guests gasped. A few stepped back. A few cameras clicked. No one spoke up for Theo. Not a single soul. Theo stood there, speechless. Eliza turned to look at him. For the first time, her gaze held no pain, no anger, just unfamiliarity. "You can have your freedom, Theo, but you don't get to take what was never yours. Not me. Not your father's trust, and certainly not that ring." She turned and walked away. She didn't need to stay to witness the rest. The moment the wrought iron gate closed behind Eliza, an eerie hush fell over the estate garden. No one said a word. A few guests quietly set their wine glasses down. Some pretended to answer calls and slipped away. Others avoided making eye contact with Daphne and Theo, as if betrayal might be contagious. Within 5 minutes, chairs began to empty. Daphne stood frozen, pale, her hand still tingling from where the ring had been removed, like a blade cutting into her pride. "You told me she was just your past. Someone insignificant, a ghost," she hissed, eyes blazing. Theo clenched his jaw, trying to keep steady. "I didn't know my father would do that. I thought it was over." Daphne let out a cold laugh and held up her phone. "What about this?" She shoved the screen in front of him. A flood of comments, shares, and headlines had begun surfacing. CEO of Wren and Partners exposed, cheating while wife battles cancer. $4.2 million engagement ring reclaimed during party. Eliza Wren returns. Grace under fire or rightful heir? Theo's face strained of color. A new notification popped up on his phone. From Board of Partners, Wren and Partners, subject emergency meeting, PR crisis. All decision-making authority revoked until further review. He opened another email. The Seattle Museum design contract canceled. Then another. Knightbridge Capital had pulled their investment. Gone. No one cared who was right. They only cared about being clean. All this over one goddamn party? He roared, slamming his hand onto the buffet table. Daphne folded her arms, her laugh brittle. "No. It's because you thought a woman who loved you for 20 years would stay silent forever." Theo looked around. Only a few servers remained. The stage sat untouched. Wine had spilled across the tablecloth like dried blood from a play already finished. That evening, Eliza sat in her small photo studio, flipping through black and white prints. Naomi made tea. Horace, her father-in-law, read an old book quietly in the corner. "I didn't think it would happen this fast," Eliza said, her voice low. Horace didn't look up. He just nodded. "Justice doesn't need to rush. It only needs to arrive on time." Eliza smiled. For the first time in a long time, she didn't feel like the woman left standing outside the story. Across town, in a temporary rental apartment, Theo stared at a cascade of canceled contracts, unanswered messages, and headlines that kept spreading. Beside him, Daphne lay curled under the blanket, back turned, her phone screen glowing. She was logged into a dating app. He had won the spotlight, but lost every gaze that ever mattered. Spring came late to Astoria. Lavender buds began to bloom along the porch rail, and sunlight spilled across the wooden floors of the small bayside home, like it was whispering something soft, something kind. Eliza sat by the window, a cup of chamomile tea in her hand. Her hair had begun to grow back, soft curls, gentle waves like fragments of memory. She had just completed her second round of follow-up scans, all clear. No rogue cells, no further chemotherapy needed. She didn't cry when the doctor said it. She just exhaled, slow and steady, like she'd been handed back something she once believed was lost, trust in her own body. Her little photo studio had begun to gain quiet attention. No flashy ads, no social media campaigns, but those who came back. She didn't shoot weddings. She didn't do glossy portraits. Eliza captured what was real. A single mother with deep-set worry lines, a child newly bald after her first chemo, an elderly couple standing by a moss-covered brick wall. Each frame was a sliver of life, unedited, unretouched, and yet beautiful in a way that couldn't be looked away from. One afternoon, she received an invitation to a fall photography exhibition in Seattle. The theme, Those Who Stayed. She didn't hesitate. Her series The Return was already assembled. Images she'd taken throughout her treatment, her recovery, her quiet resurrection. Not a victim, not a hero, just a woman who stood up from within herself. Another day, Naomi called. She was getting married. The man was a fellow sculpture teacher, and the two of them wanted Eliza to shoot their wedding. Not for her technique, but because I want your eyes to be what remembers the beginning. Eliza said yes, this time without a moment's pause. That night she sat down to write a note. Not to send, not to post, just to tuck into the journal beside her bed. In slow, deliberate script, she wrote, "Dear Eliza from the past, they didn't leave because you weren't enough. They left because you were too real for them to face. You once thought you had nothing left, but you forgot. A woman who's brushed past death doesn't fear the dark anymore. You came back. No one handed you a crown. But the sky, it stayed blue because you kept looking up." She closed the journal, switched off the light, no applause, no medals, just a woman alive, breathing, and no longer needing to apologize for any part of who she was. That was the real victory.